I expected it to end. That was my fundamental mistake. The assumption that time would eventually break the tension for me. When the story began, my body was already positioned close to his, far past the point of a casual encounter. There had been no gradual approach, no gentle easing into the moment. We were simply there, existing in a proximity so tight that any sudden movement to retreat would have felt like an admission of defeat. I could feel the steady, unnerving calm radiating from him. A silent pressure that required no words to be felt. At the time, I convinced myself I had merely misjudged a small detail, something inconsequential that would pass within a heartbeat. But the heartbeat passed, and then another, and nothing changed. The seconds began to stretch, pulling thin like glass reaching its breaking point. I was aware of the age difference between us, of course, but I treated it like distant static on a radio. A background noise that didn't demand my attention. Not yet. I shifted my weight ever so slightly, anticipating that universal signal people give when they are about to disengage. A subtle lean back or a break in focus. He offered none of it. There was no hesitation, no recalibration of his stance. The closeness stayed exactly where it was, firm, balanced, and terrifyingly controlled. It wasn't rushed, nor was it strained. It was simply maintained with a deliberate intent that made my breath catch in my throat. That was the moment the quiet realization took root. This wasn't a fleeting moment. This was an anchor. I moved again, more noticeably this time, testing the boundaries of the space we shared. His response was immediate but silent. He adjusted with me, matching my change in posture without losing a fraction of his pace. He didn't break the rhythm he'd established. He simply absorbed my movement and integrated it into his own. For the first time, I looked at him properly. I wasn't searching for the lines on his face or the color of his eyes. I was trying to solve the mystery of his stability. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker, as if the four walls were slowly exhaling, leaving no room for a casual exit. Time moved forward, but he remained a statue of intent. Somewhere between my third restless adjustment and his effortless response, I understood a truth I hadn't prepared for. This wasn't going to end on my terms. I stopped calculating how much time had passed, and started paying attention to the terrifying consistency of his presence. That was the fundamental shift. I had assumed the rhythm would eventually falter. That subtle unevenness that creeps in when a person pushes past their comfort zone. I waited for a twitch, a sigh, or a flicker of fatigue. It never came. What changed instead was everything around us. The environment seemed to warp under the weight of his stillness. My own posture, once confident, began to feel like a series of frantic corrections. Every time I tried to find a new center of gravity, he made a small, nearly invisible adjustment. It wasn't faster or harder, it was smarter. It was the kind of correction a predator makes when it knows the prey has nowhere left to run. I found myself matching him automatically, mirroring his movements like a shadow. Then the cold chill hit me. I was the one doing the matching. The pace didn't ask a single thing of him. It asked everything of me. I felt it in the way my weight shifted forward, then back, a desperate dance to keep up with a man who refused to rush or fade. There was no outward encouragement from him, no overt pressure to stay. There was simply a calm, crushing persistence that denied me even a second to reset my thoughts. The idea of this being temporary evaporated. He wasn't conserving his energy for a finish line. He wasn't testing his limits to see how far he could go. He was already settled. He was home. I noticed the space again. It had reorganized itself around us without a single word being spoken. Standing still no longer felt like a choice. It felt like a feat of endurance. Every small movement I made was answered with a fluid grace, as if he had anticipated my discomfort minutes before I felt it. My breathing began to change, becoming shallow, conscious, and labored, while his remained a steady, rhythmic pulse. In that quiet, undeniable way the heart communicates truth before the brain can process it, I realized something that made my chest tighten. He wasn't keeping up with me. I was drowning in the wake of his composure. If I had been looking for a sign of weakness, I was looking in a desert. I kept expecting that inevitable moment where consistency gives way to effort. The slight lag in a reflex, the involuntary pause people take when their muscles or their minds begin to protest. It never arrived. What arrived instead was a different, sharper kind of awareness. I began to realize that this ordeal wasn't costing him the same currency it was costing me. While I was spending every ounce of my focus just to remain upright and composed, he seemed to be gaining interest on his investment. I made another adjustment, smaller this time, almost instinctive, a plea for some kind of relief. He responded instantly. He didn't change the pace. He simply corrected his posture, resetting himself with the casual ease of someone who knows exactly how long they can occupy a space. The closeness never broke. It resumed seamlessly, an uninterrupted flow of presence that made my head spin. That was when I stopped searching for signs of his struggle. I stopped listening for a break in his breathing or a tightening in his jaw. There were no signals because there was no limit. Instead, there was only repetition, calm, measured, and hauntingly beautiful in its precision. It was the kind of steadiness that doesn't need to announce itself because its existence is its own proof. Each moment stacked on top of the last, not building toward a grand finale or a graceful exit, but reinforcing a foundation that felt ancient. I realized I was the only one left tracking the time. My heart began making frantic choices for me, dictating subtle shifts meant to manage the growing demand on my body. I was searching for ease in a situation that had become entirely rigorous. He noticed every single shift. He adjusted with me, staying exactly where he was, never allowing the gap to widen or the intensity to drop. There was no sense of him pushing through a difficult task. He had simply settled into the rhythm, as if it were his natural state of being. And that was the moment the last exit closed in my mind. It wasn't that I was physically restrained. It was that the reality of the situation had finally set in. The idea of him slowing down, or giving in before I did, was no longer a possibility. The dynamic had locked into place, defined not by force, but by an endurance that refused to fade. By the time I realized the sheer volume of effort I was exerting, it was already too late to pretend. My body had shifted fully into a desperate mode of maintenance. Balance became my first priority, posture my second, and breathing a distant, struggling third. Every adjustment carried the weight of survival. A slight lean, a careful repositioning of my feet, the way I redistributed my weight. It was all a frantic attempt to stay exactly where I was without shattering. Through it all, he didn't change a thing. The pace remained level. It wasn't pressing into me, yet it wasn't easing off either. It was simply a constant, unwavering force. It was the kind of steadiness that acts as a mirror, reflecting your own instability back at you. It asked the same silent question over and over again, until the answer became impossible to ignore. I felt the strain migrate. It didn't seep into him, but rather flowed away from him and settled entirely into me. The space around us, once just a room, had become a crucible that demanded my full attention, my full control, and my absolute presence. I adjusted one last time, my movements becoming heavy. He met me instantly, not by reacting to my struggle, but by anticipating my need for a new anchor. His posture reset with a practiced, terrifying ease. He looked like someone who knew exactly how long this could last and had no intention of being the one to break. The closeness never loosened. It held steady and unbroken while everything else in my world worked 10 times harder just to keep up. That was the moment I finally understood the distinction. This wasn't a display of effort on his part. It was a display of capacity. Time eventually lost its linear shape. The seconds stopped lining up, and the only thing that mattered was staying aligned within a rhythm that refused to yield. The final moments didn't arrive with a flourish or a release. They arrived like a quiet, heavy confirmation, long sustained and undeniable. It was the kind of truth that doesn't need a postmortem because the heart already understands what the mind has been resisting for so long. As I held on, aware of the staggering cost of my position, I saw that he didn't need to adjust at all. I had been wrong about him, about his strength, his intent, and his limits from the very beginning. The story didn't end because we ran out of time. It ended because I finally understood who was truly in control.